Alright, so we're given the problem, find the derivative of w with respect to u, find the derivative of w with respect to v when w is related to x, y, and z, and x is related to uv, y is related to uv, z is related to uv, and it says draw a branch diagram for each of these. So to start out, we know that w is not directly related to uv, so we know that it has to go through x, y, and z to begin with, and then x, y, and z are connected to uz. So if we follow the path of u from w to u, we go, there's one path from w to x and then to u. There's a path from w to y and then to u. There's a path to z and then to u, and that's it. So there's three possible ways to get to u. So that all influences how we find dw over du. So the same can be said, for v. So to get to v, there's three different ways. You can go to x, and then you can go to v. You can go to y, and then to v, and then you can go to z to v. So we know from the chain rule that dw over du is going to be equal, because there's three different ways to get to u. We know we have to take the derivative of w with respect to x first, multiply it by the derivative of dx with respect to u, and that's one path. So from there you have two other paths you have to add on to that. So you do the same thing for y and z. So uy u plus du. And you can see that you do the same exact thing for v. All you'll be doing is be subbing in v to each of these spots. So you can see there's three different paths. So all of those influence each of the numbers. So if you can't just say that x influences it, because there's two other variables here that are impacting this value. If you look at it from a logical standpoint, if you take out the numbers and instead put in things like, for example, if w is a car, something that's very, very general, and it means whatever, there's so many parts to a car, you can't really break it down. But just like w is related to x, y, and z, a car is related to, say, the brand of the car. It's also related to the number of gears in the transmission, so the kind of transmission. It's also related to whether it's an automatic or a manual transmission. So W is related to X, Y, and Z. Car, a general car, which is very broad, is related to the brand of the car, the kind of transmission, and whether it's an automatic or manual. And these things are related to something like the exact gear ratios in a car. And this will make sense once we do some of these connecting branches. The actual gear ratios, though, in the car is related to all of these. So Toyota may only make a certain kind of gear in certain sizes, certain ratios. The brand is not going to make every single kind of gearbox. They're just not. They're not going to have the capabilities to. A 5-speed may only work with certain gear ratios. An automatic may influence what kind of gears you're using, or if it's a manual, it might change that as well. And then also, so that would be the same as U, and then you'd have something like a clutch disc, for example, and these are just specific parts. You could break this down with an engine or anything else the same way. So you know that W is related to X, Y, and Z, just like a car is related to the brand, the transmission, and also a part of the transmission here. And each of those is related to these specific parts. And the same way that when you go from W to U, the same thing can be said for a car in finding these specific parts. It has to go through the brand of the car, and then you can get, that influences the gear ratio. Whether it's a 5-speed, a 4-speed, a 6-speed, 10-speed even, that's also going to influence the gear ratio. And of course, whether it's an automatic or a manual. So those three things are influencing that. And really you could say that for, in a car especially, there's a lot more things that might influence the gear ratio. So you could make this a lot more broad than it even is here, but just for this example, we're going to say just these three things. And then for the clutch disc, the same thing. So the brand is only going to make certain clutch discs, and a 5-speed is only going to work with certain clutch discs, and an automatic is only going to work with certain clutch discs. And you can see if W is changed up here, something that's very broad, so W, not thinking of these as specific numbers, just values really. If W is changed to say something quite different, like a tractor, which is quite different than a car, you can see that each of these values is going to change a lot. So all three of these are going to be influenced because this big value, W, has changed. And you can also see, say, going back to a car, if you would change this to another car brand, these things aren't going to change as much because it's still a car brand, it's still a car, and it's still going to work like a car. And the same can be said for all of these. So if you change W, the whole thing is going to change a lot more than if you're just changing an X, a Y, or a Z, compared to something very broad like W. So this is just a logical connection that you can make with the chain rule to put some real values on it, not necessarily number values, but for example, like a car, all of these transmission parts and these specific parts that you can actually feel like a gear or clutch disc. Hope this makes sense.